you go back to the old shopkeeper that used to look after the customer with the apron and what was the service mentality and wrap the pound of butter, etc. And then we saw that sort of impacted firstly by self-service retailing. And then post self-service retailing, we've seen the advent of scanning and the introduction of technology, and then the World Wide Web. And today we're going through this AI transformation combined with a real transformation that's been undertaken or disruption that's occurring in the market. The main disruptions that are occurring are things such as marketplaces. So in Australia, you see Amazon, Temu, Shein, to name a few, that are having a fairly demonstrative effect on the traditional form of bricks and mortar retail.
Welcome back to the Insurgent Mindset. I'm Matt Tice.
And I'm Rondo Moses. This is a podcast about challenger thinking in a world shaped by disruption.
In each episode, we explore the strategies and leadership mindsets that help businesses break from the pack and stay ahead in fast-changing markets.
You'll hear conversations, case studies, and insights from leaders who are applying these mindsets to thrive in this uncertain environment.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and check out our companion blogs at insurgentsgroup.com for a summary of takeaways from each episode. Now let's get into today's discussion. I'd like to introduce Bernie Brooks, innovator, retail guru, investor, and all-around good bloke. Nice to see you, Bernie.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the intro. Appreciate it.
So, Bernie, as we start this conversation, what would be really interesting to our listeners would be to hear a little bit about your story. So what are you doing now? And then walk us back through your storied career and give us a sense of, what are the thematics around your experience?
Sure. So I started a career as a school teacher. Didn't enjoy school teaching, so then ended up going into the management training program at Woolworths, which is one of the largest retailers in Australia. Spent nearly 24 years across different divisions of Woolworths, running supermarkets to the discount department store business, to the liquor business, to the electronics business, and then left Woolies in 2006. And then took up the role for 9 years as being the CEO of My Department Stores in Australia, which is the largest department store group. And then once I'd finished there, and during that time, I also spent 3 years in India with Woolworths, setting up Woolworths India, and 3 years in China, setting up all of the sourcing offices for Woolies. And then once I'd finished at Myer, I also then went to Africa for 3 years to run the largest retail non-food group in Africa, and then returned from Africa. And today I've got about 5 or 6 boards that I chair, including the CEO Institute, right the way through to the Australian Food and Grocery Council, a director at the Australian Turf Club, the chairman of DOTS, a listed company on the ASX in Australia, and a number of other private equity ventures that I chair or work with across Australia. So quite a diverse portfolio, and certainly, although I moved a little bit away from retail, it's still in the blood, and it's still the main game for me, particularly with the Australian Food and Grocery Council, which runs all of the food FMCG suppliers that supply the major supermarkets. So pretty busy, but enjoy being busy.
So that's amazing, Bernie. So I guess it'd be really interesting to start our discussion on kind of a bit of a primer on retail in Australia. What's changing? How's it evolving? Heard some interesting news over the last few days about David Jones. There's a lot of volatility in many ways, but also many things feel very familiar and stable here too. So can you give us a sense of what's changing in retail here in Australia, but maybe more broadly as well, given your background?
Sure. So I think retail generally is still undergoing a significant period of change. If you go back to the old shopkeeper that used to look after the customer with the apron and what was the service mentality and wrap the pound of butter, etc. And then we saw that sort of impacted firstly by self-service retailing. And then post self-service retailing, we've seen the advent of scanning and the introduction of technology, and then the World Wide Web. And today we're going through this AI transformation combined with a real transformation that's been undertaken or disruption that's occurring in the market. The main disruptions that are occurring are things such as marketplaces. So in Australia, you see Amazon, Temu, Shein, to name a few, that are having a fairly demonstrative effect on the traditional form of bricks and mortar retail. So in Australia, bricks and mortar retail is still about 85 to 88% of the total market. But the impact now of the growth in online sales is starting to be as significant as we've already seen in places like Korea, the UK, and to some extent the US. And so that acceleration is really disrupting the traditional bricks and mortar model. Some of those bricks and mortar retailers have responded really well. I mean, Woolworths are now doing $4 or $5 billion in turnover in online. Coles the same. Myer have got a very good online offer, and we're seeing a lot of the specialty fashion groups now achieve anything from 10 to 20% of their volume in online. So we saw this disruption of the marketplaces and the pure play operators across every regime of retail. And then what we saw was the reaction of the traditional bricks and mortar retailers to outgun those endeavours with a really good online offer. And so we're seeing now a bit of a sort out of some of those marketplaces and businesses that had clean sailing like Kogan and fighting back against Temu and fighting back against Shein. I think Amazon, though, as a monster, is pretty hard to fight against, and Amazon certainly still going from strength to strength and stealing market share. And when you look at Woolies and Coles, they're performing very well in food, but everyday items such as toilet paper, personal needs, cleaning products are being now fractured and purchased at Amazon and purchased online at a multitude of players. So we're seeing that continued disruption occur in just about every area. And then you've got the old traditional models of, let's say, department stores, which I think are struggling throughout the whole of the world. I mean, you've got two department stores in Australia that are doing just on $5 billion in total turnover, and you've got a couple, and then you've got four or five discount department stores that have also struggled as well, and they've been impacted probably most by online, and they've also been disrupted by suppliers such as some of the cosmetic and perfume suppliers going direct to the customer, and so they're moving away. So things like Estee Lauder, which used to be traditional cosmetic houses inside department stores, have now got their own freestanding stores. But added to that, they've got a B2C business, and that escapes the need to have a department store that clicks the ticket along the way. So evidently, we're starting to see now a real fracture occur in department stores. And so in Australia, there's about 100 department stores, which is probably, to be honest, about 50 too much. And we're seeing the impact now, and David Jones performing very poorly with a high degree of debt. Myer have had a bit of a lifeline with Mr. Lou rolling in a number of specialty stores into their portfolio. But underlying growth in department stores is flat to negative, and I think they're very unproductive in the amount of space they've got. And they've got the legacy of very large store footprints that effectively are causing them to pay larger rents, and they can't be as mobile as, say, a discount department store. And then we used to have three big discount department stores being Kmart, Target, and Big W. Big W just starting to return to profit. Kmart doing exceptionally well, and Target doing exceptionally poorly. And that's the one that's being rationalized at a rapid rate. So we're going through this sorting out, and the future will look quite different with a greater apportionment of online. We're seeing bricks and mortar retailers very good now in online and becoming quite competitive. We're seeing the continual disruptor of Amazon. We'll see a slight resurgence in something like eBay. And we're about to move into a space where eBay are moving to eBay Live, which is like let's call it a TV shopping network. And then also what we're seeing is we're now starting to see the social commerce players also move into that space as well. And so we'll see, for example, the TikTok marketplace, which is already launched in the US, will be here as well. So further disruption to come. So it's quite a period of change, which is I know a long answer, Matt, but I think it gives you a perspective as to where things are at.
So, Bernie, I guess there's a lot there, right? So, a couple things I'd love to explore just for a minute, like without necessarily naming names, but where you can, please do. Who are going to be the winners and losers as this unfolds? And I'd be interested to hear how you might unpack the Target Kmart sort of you mentioned that one's doing very poorly in Target. Kmart seems to be going from strength to strength. Clearly, and they're in the same group. So I think it's interesting to understand, how that leadership mindset might be different in these two businesses and why one is strong and the other is weak.
Sure. So let's start with that. I think a Target, the brand names are taken from on a consignment basis from the US, and similarly Kmart. So both those brands you're familiar with in the places such as the United States. Both those brands were purchased very early on, and effectively Kmart was seen as a discount department store, and Target was seen as a more upmarket discount department store. And Kmart concentrated on everyday needs, whereas Target was very big on home fashion, home accessories, everything from furniture and office. In simple terms, Target got stuck in the middle. And when you're stuck in the middle in any game, it's very, very hard to be successful. And so Kmart were very smart and went to an everyday needs, a very good private label offering, reduced the range significantly, bought large quantities of stock, had a real focus on good quality, value for money product, and marketed themselves that way. Target was stuck in the middle, getting impacted firstly by department stores, by supermarkets that moved more and more into everyday needs, by other discount department stores that were better than them, such as Best and Less, such as Harris Scarfe, not to mention Big W, and they got stuck certainly in the middle. And so effectively, the product that they were selling lacked a uniqueness, lacked the value proposition, and they suffered significantly. And then if you look at Big W, which went through a roller coaster of very, very poor performance, they've now moved much closer to the model that we're seeing that's been successful in Kmart. Everyday needs, a lot more food offerings than what Kmart have, but they've done a very, very good job of getting a core proposition for the customer to understand. And I think that Target will eventually disappear in Australia, and what you'll see is just two discount department stores, both fighting in a similar space, but both with a good value for money offering. So getting stuck in the middle was the problem all along. As for who are going to be some of the winners, I think there's no doubt that Kmart continues to go from strength to strength. They've got a very good private label offering that they've harnessed over a long period of time, and that gives them a competitive advantage and a differential to what's happening. I think Amazon will continue to go from strength to strength, continue with the frequency, the speed of delivery. They know exactly what they stand for. They're yet to move into food in a big way in Australia, and I think that's their biggest opportunity. But the way in which they've managed both the opportunity to have prime, automatic daily delivery, and an excellent range and a real great website, I think they're going to continue to steal significant amount of market shares from all retailers, both bricks and mortar and online. I think the other winners will certainly continue to be some of the very good specialty chains, such as Lovisa, which is now worldwide, which is a jewelry business and continues to go from strength to strength. And why? Because they sell very good value young girls' jewelry that sells between $5 and $10 per piece, and they understand their market very, very well. So Lovisa will continue to go from strength to strength. And we're seeing the resurgence of a couple of retailers that did run into trouble, such as Adairs, which is a bit like Bed Bath and Beyond, and again a very good offering, moving to private label, and so they've found private label as their strength. And lastly, I think both the supermarkets in Australia will continue to go well. I mean, Aldi did get a very good sort of few years, but now I think Woolies and Coles have started to get on top of that Aldi model. They understand it a lot better. They're a lot more competitive on price. And even the last couple of days, Woolies and Big W have been rolling back prices to compete more and more with Aldi and the discounters. So I think both the supermarkets will continue to do very well in Australia. A few sort of startup specialty businesses that are starting to do quite well. I mean, Universal Store is a great youth store, and again, you've got JB Sports that also has taken the market quite well. So there's winners in a number of categories. The winners really have come around because, firstly, they've established a point of difference. Secondly, they've predominantly chased a value for money offer from a customer. And thirdly, they've been very strong on unique product or private label product that has enabled them not to go for people not to go to the web, look at their product and compare prices because their product is only available to them. And if I just simply take my TVSN home shopping network that I've owned now for a few years, that's a nice little business. 95% of the product we sell there is not available anywhere else. So even if we have a Dyson product, it's got a different bag or it might have a different accessory, but everything we sell is unique to us. And that gives us a point of difference. So you can't Google it, check the price, because the only place you can buy it is TVSN. And I think that's a significant point of difference for a lot of successful retailers.
Bernie, is the business model changing? So you mentioned value and private label, but is the mix of channels a key factor for these sort of emerging kind of competitors? or even for Woolies and Coles, I think the kind of the established incumbents. Do you see that they're changing their business models significantly, or is it more of a long, slow adjustment?
No, I think we've seen some really big capital investments in a number of areas that they're getting the benefit from. And probably the biggest change that I've seen in the business model is that supply chain has suddenly become, let's use the word sexy in retail. I mean, previously it was moving boxes around a warehouse and having guys in a warehouse pick and pack product. Today, it's a big investment in automation, a big investment in AI, and that's given them a competitive advantage. If you can take 1 or 2% out of your costs by automating a distribution center and investing capital with a good return on investment. And so, therefore, the secret to Amazon's success, the success that Woolies and Coles are having, is largely coming about because they've invested very heavily in supply chain. So, I think the first business model change has been instead of seeing supply chain as an enabler, they're seeing it as a competitive advantage. And successful retailers around the world have refocused on their supply chain. And even if you think of the last mile to the customer, the same thing, the ability to get the product to the customer efficiently. I mean, Woolies are using electric trucks. You can get same day delivery on groceries, same as Amazon. And I think that's becoming a competitive advantage to itself. So the first business model change has been supply chain. I think the second business model change has been everything's got to be done digitally. So, the concept of having a bricks and mortar division that look after stores and operate in stores, today every aspect has got to be digitally infused. Everything's got to have an omni-channel approach. The customer doesn't know when they buy a product whether they're going to buy it online, in store, click and collect, delivered to them today, delivered to them in a week. And to them, they've got their customers agnostic, so you have to be agnostic as well. The same product should be available in any one of those formats. The same product should be available in store. And so I think the second one has been the ability to manage the digital part. And the third part has been what I call a greater focus on the customer journey and consumer-led thought process. So, I was talking to one of the CEOs of one of the major retailers yesterday, and she was quite adamant that anything that they were doing on range, price, promotion had to have a significant customer lens on it. And she used that word customer lens. And so I know that she goes shopping with customers. I know that she spends time out effectively in the store talking to customers. And that consumer-led approach means you're making decisions in a boardroom that have a full consumer lens. So they've been the three sort of parts. I think the last part that we haven't seen that we're now starting to see is an agility. These are big retailers, they've got big infrastructures, and it becomes very hard for them to make change and to tack their ship effectively. They're now starting to learn to be quicker, more effective, more efficient, and quicker response to the changing marketplace. If you look at the Middle East crisis at the moment, we're starting to see retailers respond to that a lot quicker than what they did when COVID first hit. And I think they're becoming more agile, and that would probably become the fourth bastion of good retailing going forward.
Hmm.
Interesting. So, Bernie, I'm curious, this customer-led approach, we often talk about being, customer proximity being an insurgent characteristic that organizations need to be focused on. How linked is this whole customer-led approach and the importance of the value proposition that you describe for companies like, Kmart, for example, that has led to their success? Do you see them going hand in hand in terms of the customer-led approach, sort of feeding companies really developing sharper value propositions?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when I work for a private equity company and they're looking to purchase a business, and when I've purchased a business myself, I have a sort of a golden rule that the first thing you do is you go in and you run customer focus groups. The second thing you do is you run your staff focus groups, and the third thing you do is you run your supply focus groups. And then I write down all the things that they want, all the issues that they have, all the things they like and they don't like. I put it into a little plan, and I say, this is what we're going to do. When you first go into the company, they think you're a genius, but you actually aren't. You've just stolen everybody's ideas and plagiarized what your customers have told you. And that becomes a really good mud map or game plan for how you want to go forward and run or initiate any activity within a company or even do a merger and acquisition. And I think that example is what we're now seeing at places such as Kmart. They know that their customers were in search of value. They know that they were overcrowded by a fractured range. And so if you go in, they've got a fantastic range of private label. And instead of just being able to buy buy a toilet brush holder, you can buy a toilet brush holder, you can buy a soap dispenser, you can buy a soap dish, you can buy a a whole series of products, a tissue holder, all in the same color, very, very good quality, and more importantly, matching. And so they're thinking that the customer wants that easy solution-based selling that they can effectively deliver. The other part is they know that customers will Google a price. So if you want to buy a trash bin or you want to buy even a good quality shirt, you know that the customer knows value. They know what they should be paying for that. And they're very good at constantly checking prices in the market to ensure that they are competitive and they're not undersold. And so what we're seeing is a representation of the customer's values and views in the purchasing habitat that goes on for the buyers. So the buyers then understand what the customers want. And lastly, the concept of data. And so effectively, retailers have now got a rich vein of data that they're starting to use. They've always had this repository of data from scan information, from what's called Home Shop. They've had this data. Now they're able to actually, with the help of AI, actually look at that data, understand what it means, and make decisions based on that data. Many times you're doing a range and you have what's called good, better, best. You're doing a range and you might say, I want a blue one, a red one, a green one, a yellow one. That really has got to be driven by the customer's data that you've got in front of you and understanding the trends and the modernity of what a customer's shopping habitats are. And so we're seeing that change occur as well. And that's where the consumer-led lens now becomes a much bigger lens in the retail environment.
Bernie,
Interesting.
on that point about consumers, I'd be curious your thoughts on how consumer behavior is changing, the maybe stratification of the digital native versus old guys like us, sort of like how is the consumer, because you rightly pointed out that the consumer gets a seat at the table in this discussion. How is consumer behavior changing, and to what degree is that behavior change driving decision making in these retailers?
I think the first thing is the speed. I mean, when online first was born, you would order something and expect to get it delivered within a week or two. And even then, there wasn't the full range on show. So the first thing now is what we would have, say, 10 years ago called an impossible feat of ordering something now and getting delivered in 2 hours' time. That becomes the norm for people. I think whether it's my 15-year-old grandson will go online and order something and expect it to be there that day. So the expectation and anticipation at the speed at which things happen is probably the first and most significant change. I think the second part is they're less sticky or less trustworthy of retailers. When I was growing up on Thursday night was late night shopping. We'd always go to exactly the same supermarket, buy very similar products. It might be a Saturday morning shop where you'll go out for some apparel, and that was the habitat today. Now, people shop whenever they want. They'll go to more than one venue. So the average supermarkets visited about 2.2 visits each week. And they might go to Aldi to get some basic necessities. Then they might go to Woolworths and they might even pop into Coles to get something they can only get at Coles. So what we're seeing is a much less loyal customer that demands things a lot faster. And the third aspect is that expectation of value. They know when you are, for want of a better word, ripping them off. If your margin is too high, and they can now price check with their phone in the aisle in a second, and particularly with the help of Google, etc., they can understand the value proposition. So they certainly are more akin to value, and they won't stand getting ripped off. I think the second part is that they are very much the favor of what you would call the speed at which things happen. And I think that sort of expectation that goes with the speed as well. And certainly they're a lot less loyal than what they have. I'd add one other aspect to that, and that is I think you're dealing with what I would call a flirty customer that will come in flirting and buy something and then not buy something, but they are inconsistent and not necessarily easy to measure, and that makes things like forecasting very, very difficult as well. They are also very cognizant of the sustainability and environmental aspects. They ask questions about where was the garment made. They ask questions about recycling. They're very, very good on vintage clothing and second-hand apparel. And I think they've taught people with grey hair like us about the value of investing in the future sustainability of the world and the environment. So I think that also is something that I think is a very good trait that we're seeing evidenced in their purchasing and evidenced in what they say and what they do and product education as well.
Bernie, another thing that you mentioned was eBay coming back, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. Like 10 years ago, they told us that peer-to-peer was going to be much bigger, and I'd just be curious about what some of the horizon trends are coming. Is peer-to-peer or secondhand upcycling? Are there other things on the horizon, perhaps that are maybe in Europe or other markets that are, that you're tracking and watching that might play a role in how retail will evolve here?
Yeah, I think integrated mediums now of social commerce, particularly, where you're watching a runway show and you like the dress and you can press on it and purchase that dress immediately. And I think that's the immediacy of social commerce. I think when eBay do live, it will be like a home shopping channel meets Amazon, and effectively you'll be able to watch something, watch the utilization of it, watch the value proposition of it, understand the product, and then buy it immediately. And it's funny because I think the most dynamic form of retailing I've ever seen is actually my TVSN home shopping network, because you run a 1 hour show of, say, a diamond necklace, or a 1 hour show of a Dyson vacuum cleaner. And during that hour, you show them how to use it, what the value is, what the comparisons are. You might show how good the product is. And effectively, during that show, people are purchasing as it goes. And we run a little thing on the bottom that says, of the red one, we've only got five left. Of the blue one, we've got three left. And so it adds dynamic. And the producer during that time will say to the presenter, hey, we're running out of blue ones. You better move the red one to the front. And that is the most dynamic form of resource of retailing that you can get. And I think that's what we'll see with social commerce. And that's certainly what we'll see with eBay Live. And I think eventually you'll see Amazon move into a similar sort of live TV environment. And TV shopping, I think, will probably effectively be replaced one day by a social commerce and an eBay type live environment and an Amazon live. So I think that's the next stage where you can see it effectively, see the utility of the product, see the value of the product, and purchase it straight away during that sort of, let's call it the TV program online.
Interesting. So Bernie, I want to switch topics and just, we talk about the insurgent mindset, the mindset that companies that thrive in an environment use that sort of set them apart from the pack to do things differently. So in your experience working with CEOs and some of the work that you're doing in your private equity capacity, what are some of the mindsets and behaviors that you've seen leaders who are really successful use that set them apart from the pack?
Yeah, I think the DNA of a successful leader is certainly hard to get, meaning it's very hard to find somebody with all of these traits. However, I think there is a DNA that's becoming evident for successful retailers and successful leaders. I think, firstly, there's got to be an inquisitiveness. I mean, if you're satisfied with what you're doing, then you've got a problem. Your profit could be record numbers, your sales can be at record numbers. And to me, that's not the time to relax. It's a time to be more inquisitive about what's happening in the market. I remember uh, Jack Shoemaker who used to run Walmart. I'd visit Walmart, and he'd say to me, I'd say, Bernie, he said, yeah, let's go into another retailer and have a look and see what we can learn. So you go around, and I'd go around, and I said, Jack, there's nothing I can learn here. I said, everything that they're doing, we're doing better. And he said, no. He said, let's walk the store again. You've got to find something that you can learn from. And that inquisitiveness is really critical. So I think, good CEOs have an inquisitiveness about what's happening in the marketplace. I think the second aspect is that you have to be creative. I mean, you forget that quite often CEOs are solving problems, whether it be an issue with an unfair dismissal, a bullying claim, whether it be how you enter a market, whether it be problems with a division. And you've got to have the good creativity of coming up with solution. And, I think you do that by using the team very well. I mean, good leaders normally have good teams, and those good teams create a good leader, and the good leader creates a good team. And so having good people around you goes without saying is pretty important. I think the other aspect that I think good leaders have is communication skill. That's not a matter of being able to talk and talk well and being verbose and express yourself. It's what I call the different mediums of communication. It might be a quick video. You might be in a warehouse and you're having a team meeting in a warehouse and you're talking about the footy. And then the next minute you're up at a board talking about sustainability and W&I insurance and those matters. So you've got to be able to dial up or dial down depending on your audience. And you've got to be able
Mm.
to dial into different forms and different mediums of communication. What is the best communication for that audience that I've got? And no longer can you stand there and do a video recording and send it out to the team. No longer can you stand there and have a town hall, as it's called, and just talk generally at a town hall. You've got to think about the medium, the structure, and the verbose nature of the communication. So the communication also makes a very good leader. I think the other trait, or I've seen a lot of leaders fall, have been their inability to understand basic financial fundamentals. And it seems a bit odd, but I
Mm.
get quite taken back by people that can't read a balance sheet. I don't have a finance degree, but I can read a balance sheet. I can look at a P&L. I can understand what makes it tick and what makes it work and ask the right questions. And I think there's a couple of people that recently I've had to take out of roles. And one of the main reasons was their inability to understand P&L and balance sheet and financials. So it is almost a point of sort of mandatory introduction to being a successful leader as well. So you've got to be competent, you've got to have good communication skills, you've got to have the ability to personally grow, be inquisitive and creative, and equally importantly, you've got to understand the numbers as well. And I think that's the sort of DNA that I've seen as successful leaders have.
Bernie, you mentioned agility before.
Yeah,
How,
yeah.
given how important that is, particularly in this super fast changing environment, um, how do you think about bringing that muscle into the leadership?
Yeah, I think a good example is, you should always have a sort of transformation manager or a transformation office or someone that's constantly changing. I mean, people say, "Oh, we've been going through so much change; it'll finish in a few months' time," and I say that's a fib. You're in a constant state of flux. You're always going to be undergoing a transformation. When you interview people for a job, they say, "Oh, I just completed a transformation." And I say, "What do you mean you completed a transformation?" "Oh, we changed to become a digital retailer." And you say, "But, so have you now gone into social commerce?" "No, but isn't that part of the transformation?" So what we're seeing is, I think, and the need to create a business where you say to them, things aren't going to be normal, things aren't going to be regular. There's always going to be a constant state of change and flux, and therefore your job's going to change, your priorities are going to change. And you do need that to have that measured, and you do need to have it managed. And therefore, the concept of a transformation office, a transformation manager, a scorekeeper, I think is going to be evident in every business. And that helps with the agility. I mean, if you think about the introduction of an ERP system, it might be a 3-year program that starts where you're bringing in SAP or you're putting in Oracle or you're making change to your major operating base. And that used to be a 3-year plan that had people taken out of roles for 3 years. That agility now in doing module at a time, doing quick updates, and the fact that you're not true blue in one system and you're getting APIs interfacing, etc., I think is an example of where business is starting to become a lot more agile. Those that undergo the massive transformation, instead of doing it in a bit at a time, and those that think that a transformation is finished, I think are those that will fail. Today is about constantly changing, constantly being more agile, and doing it in a way in which you don't interrupt the running of the business.
Now, Bernie, there's an interesting consequence to that, presumably that not only are you always upgrading your systems capability, but presumably a big part of that is in that mindset, you have to have a higher refresh rate in terms of talent. So I would imagine that you'd have to be more rigorous in terms of, you know, they used to tell us to keep people on the bus forever, right? You want everyone to be kind of symbiotic and aligned and stay on the bus. But the reality is, with this fast change, you need new capabilities and skills all the time, which means almost that traditional view of people management requires you to turn over at a much higher rate. Is that, do you think, true or not true?
Yeah, definitely true. And I think there's another part to that, which is what I'll call the in-source outsource model. So let's take marketing as an example. I think 10, 15 years ago, you'd have a marketing or brand manager, and they'd be looking at whether they advertise in press or radio or TV. And they'd build the brand, they'd do the customer research. This was the brand DNA. They'd have, a vision and mission associated with the brand, and they'd be a brand manager, and it wouldn't change too much. Today, we're seeing the enormous fragmentation of communication to the customer. And therefore, if you think about a marketing person, they have to be a brand manager, they have to be good at marketing, they've got to be a digital marketing expert, they've got to be an SOM and SEO, they've got to be an AI expert. And I'll keep going. They've got to be a social commerce expert. They've got to be able to produce content. They've got to be able to do graphic design. and there's probably 10 that I've missed. That's a very different marketing department and a very different people. So what we're seeing now is if you've got a business, say, doing 50 to $100 million, you can't afford 15 people in a marketing department because you've got to have a specialist in each of those areas because they're quite unique traits. So we're starting to see now, I think, a move back towards an outsource model to low-cost agencies that will actually manage each of those because you don't need, say, a graphic designer full-time on your payroll. You might need them for 10 hours a week. So I think what we're seeing is the changing nature of the type of people that you need and the skill set that you need. And therefore, we're seeing people then have to change structure. And I think if I think of the companies that I have things to do with, I don't think any structure's been in place for longer than a year. You're constantly changing in line with the customer. We need more people in this space, less people in this space. So you've got to understand how to measure it. It might be more people on sales. You might be introducing a CRM system that means you've got to move people from being spreadsheet operators to salespeople. And so the constant nature of change means the constant nature of change in people, skills, the reinvention of the in-source outsource model. And I think effectively we're going to start to see much more of that. So that longevity of people being in roles for 5, 10, and 15 years, I think is gone. So not only is a good business not as loyal to their staff as they used to be because they can't be, but the staff aren't as loyal to the business as well for identical reasons. So therefore, we're going to see a faster rate of churn of people, which I think is a good thing because of the changing nature of business.
So then, Bernie, I expected you also to mention potentially AI there in terms of, the role of technology playing potentially an increased, providing an increased opportunity for leaders to augment or substitute that capability. Are you seeing much of that in your portfolio companies or in retail, or are you more cautious, do you think?
I think I'm a little bit cautious. Doesn't mean I don't understand it, but I just think, I'm like all good leaders. I'm personally trying to grow and learn more and more about it. And funnily enough, one of the sessions I've got later today is talking about AI agents, and I do think that there is a little degree of caution and skepticism, but there's no doubt it's an incredible enabler. I mean, if you can outsource something to China or India, then potentially you're going to outsource it to an AI model that's going to effectively replace a lot of that outsourcing. The speed at which things can be done, the effective nature and the accuracy that's improving by the day, I think will give us a marvelous tool. And it'll juxtaposition the roles in a business. It'll juxtaposition them from more mundane jobs to more thinking and value add jobs. And I think it's quite exciting once I think the dust settles as to all the hype has gone and people start to realize the potential of AI. I think I've seen a couple of businesses that are really using AI particularly well, whether it be fundamental sort of invoice payment, invoice processing, AP, whether it be price checking, whether it be developing websites. And we're seeing more and more now utilization of AI that will move people into different roles. I don't think it's never worried me that it's going to replace jobs. If that was the case, you'd say when we moved from service retailing to self-service retailing in the 60s and 70s, that every job in retail was going to be lost because customers are serving themselves. That's wrong. They've just moved into different roles and moved into different functions. So I think we'll see the continued rise and rise of AI. I think there's so many different modes of AI that eventually it's a bit like the old days of beta video recorders and VHS. Eventually one's going to win. And I think we're going to see the same thing with the various AI platforms, that there'll be two or three that'll survive and be used by everybody, and quite a few others that'll certainly, I think, sort themselves out.
Inevitably. Very good, Bernie. So, Rondo, I'll leave it to you for the closing question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, Bernie, this has been a great conversation. So we'd like to leave our listeners, our guests to leave our listeners with a piece of advice that they would give them. So what's one piece of advice you would give to leaders who are really focused on repositioning their businesses to thrive in a disruptive environment? What would it be? And what's one practical action that they should consider in the next 60 days or so?
Yeah, I think the biggest skill in understanding the change that you need to make is the ability to listen. And it might sound very fundamental, but the CEO that is dominant and says, tally ho, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, we're going to get it done. is a 1960s, 70s, and 80s CEO, which was command and construct leadership. I think today what you want to do is gain a full perspective. The world is moving too fast. Your understanding of the world cannot necessarily keep pace. So you've got to have a big set of ears and ask questions. I challenge myself quite often at a meeting to go through the entire hour of a meeting and only ask questions. And I can get through a board meeting where I only ask questions for 2 hours during that board meeting. And it's a trait where the listening aspect becomes more important than the talking aspect. Leaders today feel they have to be the leader, tally ho, run from the front. A good leader and the change that's going on is all about listening and listening to understand and then creating a reserved and universal view across that particular business.
Bernie, I can't help myself. There's a follow-on question I must ask you. Does that mean that you would expect more democratization or decentralization of decision making? Is that an is obvious conclusion to that point,
I
where
do.
you, in order to be more flexible, you've got to be able to decentralize that decision making much more?
Yeah, I think the multifaceted nature of business today, things that were simple like picking boxes in a warehouse, now it's automated. Now it's got AI. Now you've got a larger range. Now you've got more demanding, speedy customers. No CEO can capture an understanding of the multifaceted nature of business. Those, in many cases, they probably only worked in one or two areas before they became the CEO. So the secret to it is, and I think your word's a good one, democratization of decision making. I think today we're going to see a lot more, let's call it team approaches to decision making. I have tried in a business having two CEOs. It didn't work. I thought it would, but it didn't. But I think the answer is not multiple CEOs, but the answer is a CEO that can ensure that the people around them provide good advice, competent advice, and then that gives you both a creative and universal decision-making mode.
Very good, Bernie. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on board, and we'll look forward to bringing you on again sometime in the future. And thanks so much for sharing your insights to our audience.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Rondo. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.